I request everybody to please stand up for the national anthem.
जनगण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे.
Friends, Prabodhan Mancha has been growing, and I think it's been truly blessed to have 16,500 subscribers on YouTube. We have more than 300 contributors. More than a third of those contributors made multiple donations. And WhatsApp, that panacea of communication, it has helped us grow our database to more than 3,000. So because of that, and I'll tell a little bit more when I express my word of thanks, but would request Anand Rao to welcome our speaker of the day with a shawl, Shrifar, a book, and Tirugur. Well, Dr. Ranganathan's been here just recently, and one change which he noticed, and I hope you noticed, is the chairs on the stage, which he asked us to change last time. So I must thank him for that. But I'm not going to introduce him. I don't even think I can attempt to do that. But I'll just tell you one thing. Like I said, we had a little bit of a scheduling issue. 4th of Jan, we spoke to him, and he was really, really glad to make it here. We had been speaking about him, talking about the subject, but we hadn't fixed a date. 4th of Jan, we announced the program. In 1 week, 916 passes collected, full auditorium, house full, board put up. So I don't think I need to give an introduction to the speaker. But a word of caution, sir. Everybody says you're progressing in the right direction. But now you'll have to prove that you're also a professor of JNU. So with that, Anandji, I'll turn to the topic of today. When he tweeted about this program, he said 8 reasons, 94 facts, 13 judgments, 7 acts, 43 quotes, 11 verses, 4 shlokas, 2 matlas, 909 words and 90 minutes. And I think it might be a bit longer based on our last discussion. So I don't think, while we are all fans of Anandji's free-flowing conversations, given the sensitivity of some of what he's going to speak, he said he will use a written script because he does not want any of us to get into any sort of litigation or other issues. With the paucity of time, we may be constrained to take up Q&A, but like always, we will try. So keep that in mind when you're sending your questions. We will screen them, and only if we have enough time, we'll take them. But without any more ado, over to you, Anandji.
Good morning, everyone. Wishing everyone a very happy Pongal and Makar Sankranti. It really is joy and delight to be back here, Mrugangji, and thank you so much to the organizers, especially to Mrugangji, Harshadji, and so many others, and also to have replaced the Raja Rani chairs. Last time I felt very awkward sitting with Mrugangji, and I was getting messages from my wife, "Ye kya kar rahe ho?" Bataya nahi. This time, if she is watching live on YouTube, please be rest assured everything is back to normal. And can I also say, last time I did quip that, when for others, when life gives you lemon, they make lemonade. For us South Indians, when life gives you coconut, we make coconut chutney. So last time I was given a coconut, I went home, I made wonderful coconut chutney. This time I got a bit greedy. I was expecting some idli batter. I don't know. If you're running short of funds, I think the front row will be able to manage at least idli batter next time. But as today is Makar Sankranti, and the saying goes, what you give back today on Makar Sankranti, you get back tenfold. That is what our sages have been telling us. But so today I'm going to give back 8th class citizens. I hope our government doesn't make us 80th class citizens in time to come. But and also, before I forget, Mrugangji was so kind enough to give me this. This is the Tilgud, and I've got more of that as well. And while he gave me this, he said, Tilgud ghya ani gud gud bola. Says, have this sweet and speak sweetly. What will happen? The audience hasn't come to listen to sweet talk. But I'm going to have this after my lecture. Because the fact of the matter is that time for sweetness and sweet talk is gone. As the topic suggests, this is no longer a time where we should be able to talk sweetly. And as you correctly said, Mrugangji, I had given all the data what I'm going to tell all of you. And that had, I think, 14,000 odd words. But then I thought that all of you will go home and in a week's time spend 3 hours in watching Pathan. And here I am talking for only 1.5 hours. So bahut nainsafi hai. So I have increased the word limit. So now I'm going to be talking for 2 hours. And we can have a small intermission in between for those of you who would like to, just, I don't know whether popcorns are available or not, but we'll have plenty of chances to be having that kind of conversation. But we'll have, after the 4th reason, we'll have a 5-minute break for all of us to rest, and then I'll continue again. But I think the time has really come, as I said. These are not issues that even I knew most of them even a few months ago. And when you get to know these things, you realize that others must know of this. And as I said, time for sweet talk is truly gone. Because as a very famous book, the title goes, If Not Now, When? Primo Levi's book, very famous. So with your permission and with the permission of the chair, I would like to begin on Makar Sankranti, on this talk, which I have titled Hindus in Hindu Rashtra, 8th class citizens and victims of state-sanctioned apartheid. Ever since Mahatma Gandhi succeeded in controlling this nation's pulse, we have witnessed minority appeasement on an unprecedented scale, sometimes as virtue signaling, at other times as placation of victimhood. To illustrate but one instance of the extent to which the great Mahatma was committed to realizing his vision, while preaching to those affected by the pre-partition Hindu-Muslim violence, he urged, and I quote, Hindus should not harbor anger in their hearts against Muslims, even if the latter wanted to destroy them. Even if the Muslims want to kill us all, we should face death bravely. If they established their rule after killing all Hindus, we would be ushering in a new world by sacrificing our lives, unquote. Every time I pass on a currency note, the same Mahatma sniggers at me, as though perplexed why I haven't yet sacrificed my life to usher in a new world. Well, the Mahatma need not snigger. His vision stands realized. The new world has indeed been ushered in. Right from the Khilafat movement to the cushioning of the Mopla massacre, to the Rangila Rasool incident, to blatantly discriminatory state and central articles and amendments, to school curriculums, to Hajj subsidy, to ignoring the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act, to Shah Bano, to the declaration by a sitting prime minister that minorities have the first right to resources. Every single time the minority has been appeased, it has only emboldened their leaders and political fronts for further extortion and blackmail. This has come at enormous cost, not only to their own community, but sadly also to the Hindus. But the question is not of appeasement. Yes, appeasement is discriminatory. Of course it is. But worse than appeasement is the active discrimination against the community not being appeased. Worse than appeasement of one community is apartheid against the other community. Truth be told, appeasement may rankle. Sure it does. But Indians have learned to accept it, even take it in their stride and scoff at it, for they realize the reasons for appeasements are political. And those reasons are placation of vote banks in order to win elections. And every political party, cutting across ideologies and religious affiliations or labels, indulges in appeasement. So while our Muslim population is 14.2% by the official census, as many as 31.3% of homes under the Awas Yojana, 33% of funds under the Kisan Samman Nidhi Yojana, and 36% of loans under the Mudra Yojana in the last 8 years have gone to Muslims. The BJP government has a Pradhan Mantri Shadi Shagun scheme exclusively for Muslim girls who complete their education, graduation before marriage. They will get rupees 51,000, no questions asked. Housing, skilling, scholarships, sarkari jobs, salaries to Maulvis. There is appeasement and preferential treatment meted out to the minorities by every political party, including the BJP. Heck, the BJP recently even offered Christian senior citizens a free trip to Jerusalem if they voted for it. Fact is, Ram Rajya and Rom Rajya are interchangeable, depending upon which way the wind is blowing. No, the issue, I repeat, is not of appeasement. The issue is of apartheid. The issue is of state-sponsored, state-sanctioned discrimination against a particular community. And that community is the majority Hindu community. This lecture concerns not appeasement, but apartheid. It concerns not dignity, but discrimination that is now so entrenched in our constitution, our policies, our legal framework, our society, our psyche, that they make Hindus not just second-class citizens, but rather eighth-class citizens. That this is happening in this so-called Hindu Rashtra is profoundly ironical. Here then, ladies and gentlemen, are 8 reasons why Hindus are eighth-class citizens in their own country. Number 1, state control of Hindu temples. State control of Hindu temples and their properties is by far the largest, financially most damaging scam of independent India. That it not only continues but flourishes under the Modi government is a sad reflection of how politicians in our country treat Hindus. Even using the petroleum sector as a cash cow pales in comparison to the loot and pillaging of Hindu temples. I don't know how and why. It is beyond the limits of comprehension of the flag bearers of secularism that if you truly believe that religion should keep out of state, the corollary is also equally applicable, that state should keep out of religion. But does it? Secularism is total separation of religion and state. Total. And yet there are half a dozen articles and amendments and directive principles in our constitution that make it plural, not secular. In fact, the word secular was inserted in our preamble by Indira Gandhi during the emergency. It was absent from Ambedkar's constitution. Our state declares itself to be secular, but is shamelessly not so, regulating, governing, and controlling as it does Hindu places of worship. Hindu temples have been, for thousands of years, the centers of worship, of learning, of community living, of trade and economy, of statecraft, even defense. And every invader has known that to dismantle India, you need to dismantle first this temple ecosystem. And every invader has managed it. What sets the British apart is that they managed also to pass this dismantling on to those who they ruled and subjugated. And now the latter are continuing with the dismantling. Right from the Madras Regulation 7, 1817 to the Religious Endowments Act 1863 to the Religious and Charitable Endowments Act 1925 to the Hindu Religious and Endowments Act 1927 to Act 12, 1935 to the Post-Independence Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Act 1951, Hindus have been at the receiving end of state-sponsored loot and pillaging of their places of worship. And when the 1951 legislation was challenged in the High Court and subsequently the Supreme Court, and most of the draconian provisions of the 1951 Act struck down, the Congress that was in power then quickly passed the Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments Act 1959, snubbing the court decree. 2 years ago, the Madras High Court dismissed a petition challenging the constitutional validity of this act, commenting that, quote, management of temples has got nothing to do with the right to worship. A Hindu can worship as much as he wants, unquote. But I ask you, if the Congress can bring in a legislation to control Hindu temples, one that still stands, why can't the BJP bring in a legislation to free Hindu temples? A petition by Swami Paramatma Nanda and Swami Dayanand Saraswati is pending in the Supreme Court since 2012, 10 years. They can allow midnight hearings for granting mercy to terrorists, but not here. In his plea, Swamiji gave the example of the grand Ardhanareshwara temple in Tiruchenagod, Tamil Nadu. Even though the temple generates more than 1 crore in annual income, the budget earmarked for conducting daily puja and performing rituals is a mere 1 lakh. Swami Dayanand Saraswati did not live to see the day his beloved temples would be wrested from state control. He passed away in 2015. Governments of just 10 states control more than 110,000 Hindu temples. Tamil Nadu temple trusts own 478,000 acres of temple land. Tamil Nadu government alone controls 36,425 temples and 56 mutts. For Karnataka, the figure is 34,558. Is this secularism? The communist state of Kerala has 5 Devaswam boards: Travancore, Guruvayur, Cochin, Malabar and Kudamankam. Together they manage 3,058 temples. The communists, for whom religion is supposedly the opium of the masses, are controlling Hindu temples and their boards, appointing board members on their whim and fancy. Many either belong to the Communist Party or are card-carrying members of it. Why? What business is it of the state to levy an administrative charge from anywhere between 5% to 21% on Hindu temples in the name of audit? What business is it of the state to dictate how many times a puja is to be conducted and who is to conduct it, and who is qualified to be the priest, and what is going to be the procedure for worship? What business is it of the state to control tens of thousands of acres of temple land and then send rent for it? The loss to Hindu temples on account of this itself is estimated over decades to be in lakhs of crores. According to activist and litigant T.R. Ramesh, the Tamil Nadu government that should be earning a minimum of 6,000 crores per annum from the 2.44 crore square feet of temple land it controls. It earns a mere 58 crores, not even 1%. Kapileswarar temple is one of the richest temples in Tamil Nadu, owning more than 600 acres of prime property in Chennai. State records show it has 473 defaulters, with most of its land now encroached. And this is just one state. And because of this loss in revenue generation, Hindu temples are not able to spend money on what they'd really like to spend money on. Opening up Ved Pathshalas, schools, colleges, Goshalas, fellowships and scholarships, orphanages, Hindu cultural and religious centers, all things and causes that other religions and their places of worship spend their money on unencumbered. Only in India can you step aside and watch as the state appoints non-Hindus, Muslims like Fareed Hakim, Christians like Vangalapudi Anita, on boards that control Hindu temples. Only here will we remain silent as temple idols are stolen, temple property auctioned, a whole temple-driven ecosystem and way of life dismantled, bit by bit, brick by brick. Assault on temples has turned into an assault on Hinduism itself. Imagine a Hindu priest or a politician controlling and dictating how St. Francis Church or the Jama Masjid should be run. If that happens, perhaps our judiciary would indeed conduct a midnight hearing crying death of secularism. And the funny thing is, the very same turnips who call India a Hindu Rashtra are totally silent on state control of Hindu places of worship. They never stop to ask, how on earth is this secularism? You can provide Hajj subsidy for decades, use taxpayers' money to host grand iftar parties, fund AMU that has only 1.4% Dalit students and 0.25% Dalit teachers, plunder state coffers to pay monthly salaries to tens of thousands of Maulvis, ask government-run UGC to fund minority institutions that keep 50% seats reserved for Christians, step in to overturn a Supreme Court judgment just to appease Muslims, leech thousands of crores exclusively from Hindu temples, control tens of thousands of acres of Hindu temple land, spend hundreds of crores of taxpayers' money for the Kartarpur corridor. And all this is the state not interfering or succumbing to the demands of religion. All this is secularism. The great Mahakaleshwar temple, its revenue and realty, is tightly controlled by the state government through the Mahakaleshwar Mandir Act, 1982. From appointing pujaris down to even the size of the prasadam laddu. Tirupati's hundi collection since April 22 alone are rupees 700 crores. Now the government valuation of its properties is out. 7,123 acres valued at 85,705 crores. But secularism means this temple comes under the Religious Institutions and Charitable Endowments Act. Until a High Court order of 6 months ago, Andhra Pradesh Hindu Religious Institutions Act used to force temples earning 5 lakhs or more to pay 21.5% of their income to the endowments department, no questions asked or entertained. Now the state has issued orders to set up Dharmika Parishad with draconian powers to form temple trust boards and extend land lease. Is this secularism? More than 2 years have gone by since the Tamil Nadu government informed the Madras High Court that 11,999 temples under its control do not have enough money to perform even a single puja. But then again, I ask, largely overriding the Supreme Court verdict, if the Congress can bring in a legislation to control Hindu temples in 1959, one that still stands, why couldn't the BJP, why couldn't Modi bring in a legislation to override it in the last 8 years? Why has the Modi government brought in even more Hindu temples under state control than was achieved by the previous dispensation? Why? Why does the Modi government gloat on constructing temple corridors like the one in Kashi at the cost of 350 crores when, instead of offering this Kool-Aid to gullible Hindus, it could relinquish control over Hindu temples and allow the latter to fund hundreds of such corridors over the length and breadth of the entire country? As far as I am concerned, bless you, as far as I am concerned, a Hindu temple should be publicly listed as a company. After all, it supplies a product that people buy, peace of mind and reassurance. And unlike other companies that need to constantly refine or come up with better and newer products, a temple's product hasn't changed in a millennium and never will. Indians should be able to buy stake in the temple and make the temple richer. The richer it becomes through public trading, the more it will do for the society, schools, hospitals, roads, orphanages, pathshalas, housing, and the more it does for the society, the more it will garner donations. With the temple being publicly listed, the ready excuse of the Modi government that who will control the temple after we relinquish control becomes untenable. Let the government tax the temple's wealth, no issues. but at least the wealth generated by the temple will belong to the temple. At least then the Hindus will not be so blatantly discriminated against in their own country. The second reason, 2, the injustice towards Kashmiri Hindus. Terrorists are targeting Hindus settled in Kashmir, but not the Hindus visiting Kashmir. Tourist footfall in Kashmir this past year has been the highest ever since records began, a staggering 16 million. Business is booming. Registers are ringing. Tourists are safe. They want the Hindus to flee, but then return later as tourists. They want the Hindus to come as tourists and fill their coffers, but not settle in their own land. As Kashmiri Hindu and activist Sushil Pandit, himself a victim of ethnic cleansing, says, and I quote, "Tourism in Kashmir funds jihad. The Hindus are funding their own demise." Unquote. How on earth can we watch this unfold and not do anything about it? What kind of a country is this where one can settle 40,000 Rohingya Muslims in Jammu and Kashmir but not 7 lakh Kashmiri Hindus? There is no other way of saying it. We live in a nation of broken mirrors where you possess neither a shadow nor a reflection if you're a Kashmiri Hindu. We live in a nation that waits for death to rid us of our remembrances. We tell Kashmiri Hindus, please wait a little more, just a little more. 30 years have gone, but we haven't progressed from ugly, inhospitable transit camps that dot the Kashmir landscape at Sheikhpura, Natnusa, Veerwan, Vesu, Matan, Hall. In Anantnag's Vesu transit camp, Kashmiri Hindus who want to flee because they fear for their lives are being kept locked up under constant guard. They can't even step outside to buy essentials like milk and medicines. Is this the kind of freedom promised to the land's original inhabitants? While the Rohingyas enjoy unfettered movement in the near vicinity. According to the Home Ministry data, only 17% of the promised houses for Kashmiri Hindus have been completed in the last 6 years. Only 5,928 Kashmiri Hindus have been appointed through the Prime Minister's job scheme. The number of Kashmiri Hindu refugees is 700,000. A figure derived from the data provided by the government of Jammu Kashmir that says 83,216 families fled Kashmir in the aftermath of the Kashmiri Hindu genocide. 700,000 and 5,928. I shall leave it to the mathematicians among you to subtract this number from 700,000. To an extent, the Kashmir Files, the recent film by Vivek Agnihotri, has tried to reset the Kashmiri Hindu narrative, and that is why so many are rattled by it. Many prominent Kashmiri voices, the politicians, the intellectuals, writers, poets, all those who stayed silent even as the Kashmiri Hindu genocide unfolded right before their eyes, they called for a ban on the film. To them I ask, can there be reconciliation without remembrance? Crime without comeuppance? Can there be death without deliverance? Can there be justice without Nuremberg? Why do they want to hide the truth about the Nadimak massacre that the film truthfully depicts, where terrorist Zia Mustafa lined up 23 unsuspecting Kashmiri Hindus and shot them point blank? And as he was escaping, he heard a baby cry, and his comrade goaded, "Ye karnuwa chupe," and then the baby became the 24th victim. Why do they want to hide this? Why do they want to hide the truth about Girija Tiku, who was raped and cleaved in two by a mechanical saw while she was still alive? Why do they want to hide the truth about B.K. Ganju, who hid inside a rice barrel when jihadis came looking for him after his Muslim neighbor informed on him? Ganju was shot dead. Rice laced with his blood was fed to his wife. Why do they want to hide the truth about slogans raised from mosques on 19th January 1990, Raliv, Saliv, Galiv, convert, run or die, death to kafirs, Pandits go but leave your women behind, Nizam-e-Mustafa? Why do they want to hide all this? And what is this other side of the genocide that they demand should also be shown? That Yasin Malik, assassin of Squadron Little Khanna, loved dum aloo? That Bitta karate killer of 42 Kashmiri Hindus was the son of a shawl weaver. That Zia Mustafa, perpetrator of the Nazi Mark massacre, was a compounder at a hospital. I will tell you why they want to hide this truth to be hidden. Because they realize that the Kashmir Files is not just a film. It is a Proustian collection of memories of Girija, of Ganju, of Dinanath, of tens of thousands of Kashmiri Hindus who were betrayed by their own friends. They might have taken away from the Kashmiri Hindus their home, but they can never take away from them their words. For their entrapment in a film may fool us into believing they have a physical form, a form that can be destroyed when the film is destroyed. But the words existed much before their prisons did. Words never die, never. They always survive. In times of terror, we wrap them and we hide them, like our ancestors did. And it may take 30 years or 300 or 3,000 for them to be uttered again, but uttered again they will be. And when they are, their words will echo in the valleys of violence where people only know how to light Molotovs. And these words will make them light diyas again. To be sure, I do not care about Islamists and jihadis and the politicians forgetting about those words. What bothers me immensely is that our government, our judiciary, our society has forgotten them. How can these pillars of our democracy forget those cries of Girija, those laments of Dinanath? How? Hearing them, those words, those haunting voices, one feels lost for hope, wondering whether that fabled arc of moral universe would ever bend towards justice for the Kashmiri Hindus. Remember that 3 years ago, the Supreme Court diabolically rejected reopening cases of criminal atrocities against Kashmiri Hindus because, quote, too much time had elapsed. That's correct. Justice is now weighed against time. A month ago, the same Supreme Court reiterated its previous stand, that of not opening cases of atrocities against Kashmiri Hindus. Governments come and go and we shout and we make 100 excuses, but we can't get away from the fact that Kashmiri Hindus are in exile. As Salman Rushdie expressed so poignantly in his satanic verses, and I quote, "An exile is a dream of glorious return. It is an endless paradox, looking forward but always looking back. An exile is a ball hurled high into the air. He hangs there, frozen in time, translated into a photograph, denied motion, suspended impossibly above this native earth. He waits the inevitable moment at which the photograph must begin to move and the earth reclaim its own, but it never does. When will that photograph begin to move? Mind turns numb at the very thought that this nation, we are going about our business for 30 years while 500,000 Hindus have been reduced to refugees in their own land. Is this what a so-called Hindu Rashtra is supposed to do for Hindus? We are the only country in the world that allows this, across parties, across governments, right or left or center. 3 years to 2019, 3,686 law and order incidents occurred in Kashmir. 3 years since 2019, the number is only 430. Terror attacks have reduced by 40% since 2018. But then why is it that only 5,000 Kashmiri Hindus have been brought home? And of those few who have been, more than 25 have already lost their lives. Making Kashmir Files tax-free was a great idea, but remember, your dharma, it is not to make a film tax-free. It is to make sure 7 lakh Kashmiri Hindus are brought home. Time is running out. Time is running out. A refugee accepts his fate and the humiliation that comes along with it. For he must worry about his new life. He forgets how to complain, and that is a fatal mistake. Arundhati Roy, that totem of the left, once cushioned the crimes of the Maoists by calling them Gandhis with guns. Well, Kashmiri Hindus are the Gandhis without guns. And that is the singular reason why no one cares for their plight. Because this nation This nation hears complaints through the barrel of a gun, not the ink of a pen. This nation believes inaction is a medicine. It believes time heals. It believes wounds do not fester. It believes the exiled never returns. This nation waits for death to rid its people of their remembrances. This nation wishes the Kashmiri Hindus all happiness and joy in the afterlife. Kashmiri Hindus are the Jews, but unfortunately, India is not Israel. They call Kashmir the Switzerland of the East. Wrong. It is the Srebrenica of the East. And it will remain so till such time every Kashmiri Hindu is returned home. The third reason. 3. The Waqf Act 1995. Waqf is the third largest landowner in India after defense and the railways, with much of its land holding rather amusingly pre-independence, an endowment of the insidious give and take between the British and the Muslims they desired to pacify. Indeed, many of the Waqf land holdings go as far back as 1857. 77% of Delhi is on Waqf land. I had to really practice repeating this Waqf time and again. I didn't want to make a mistake there. Including the Delhi High Court. Central Vista, that has recently been renovated and on whose hallowed turf new government buildings will shimmer and glisten, is on Waqf land. CGO Complex, Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium are on Waqf land. Only 3 things are certain in an Indian's life: death, taxes, and that knowingly or unknowingly he ends up walking every day on Waqf land. Over time, many of these Waqf properties were taken over by the government, but then inexplicably, or perhaps not, one of the last decisions of the outgoing UPA government in 2014 was to gift 123 prime central Delhi properties to Waqf and withdraw its claim on them. These prime real estates properties are from the time of our independence and were endowed to the government by the departing British. Their status remained unchanged for 70 years until March 5, 2014, when the departing Congress decided to endow them to the Waqf. Even the High Court judges have opined that Waqf land is Allah's and Allah's alone, and that the government cannot be the owner of this land. It is not just government buildings that the Waqf claims to be its properties. Mukesh Ambani's house is on Waqf land. It is worth checking whether this hall where I am delivering this lecture is also a Waqf property. Allah is all merciful, please check. The Waqf board lays claim to 354,913 estates and 866,035 properties comprising 802,000 acres of Indian land, with UP having the highest share of 213,833 Sunni Waqf board properties and 15,386 Shia Waqf board properties. हिंदू मुस्लिम गंगा जमुना यूनिटी तो बाद में संभाल लेंगे, यहाँ तो जमुना भी शिया सुन्नी में अलग अलग बट गई है. This data, by the way, is from the Waqf Management System of India, whose motto, if you visit their website, is once a Waqf, always a Waqf. Hold your horses, you Hindutvawadi Islamophobic bigots. You will, if you were to dig deeper, find that this grandiose motto is not the idea or thinking of the Waqf board or any of its members. It is, in fact, the verbatim exclamation of the Supreme Court in its 1998 judgment, case number 4372 SCR 398. Once a Waqf, always a Waqf. And the name of the honorable judge who said this iconic line, I'm not joking, Justice Dr. Anand. Allah is all merciful. Waqf essentially means that any donated property belongs to Allah in perpetuity. Waqf decides any property adjudged by Muslim law as pious, religious, or charitable, and therefore fit to be labeled as waqf. In other words, waqf is inalienable and irrevocable. If you think this is a figment of my fertile imagination, let me quote directly from a Waqf board document. Quote, Waqf is a voluntary, permanent, and irrevocable dedication of a portion of one's wealth in cash or kind to Allah. Once a waqf, it never gets gifted, inherited, or sold. It belongs to Allah, and the corpus of the waqf always remains intact. The fruits of the waqf will be utilized for any Sharia-compliant purpose, unquote. The waqf boards are, in case you were wondering, headed and constituted exclusively by Muslims. If that wasn't discriminatory enough, let me run you through some sections of the Waqf Act 1995. Section 4 bestows on the Waqf property survey commissioner the authority and power like that of a civil court. Besides, the entire cost of the surveying is to be borne by the state. So, in a sense, a Hindu's property once declared as Waqf property wholly arbitrarily will be surveyed by Waqf, and the cost incurred on this count will be paid for by the Hindu taxpayer. And people say we are living in a fascist Hindu Rashtra. Mazak kar rahe hai. Section 40 gives the Waqf power to decide if your land is Waqf or not. In fact, if your property is laid claim to by Waqf, it is your responsibility to disprove its claim. And till such time you disprove it, it is Waqf land. Quote, where the board has any reason to believe that any property is Waqf property, the board may hold an inquiry in regard to such property, and if after such inquiry, the board is satisfied that such property is Waqf property, call upon the owner either to register such property as Waqf property or show cause why such property should not be so registered as Waqf property, unquote. Section 54 gives the Waqf the power to declare you an encroacher. Quote, whenever the chief executive officer considers whether on receiving any complaint or on his own motion that there has been an encroachment on any land, building, space, or other property which is said to be Waqf property, he shall cause to be served upon the encroacher a notice specifying the particulars of the encroachment and calling upon him to show cause before a date to be specified in such notice as to why an order requiring him to remove the encroachment before the date so specified should not be made, and if, after considering the objections received during the period specified in the notice and after conducting an inquiry, the chief executive officer is satisfied that the properties in question is Waqf property and that there has been an encroachment, he may make an application to the Waqf tribunal for grant of order of eviction for removing such encroachment and deliver possession of the land, building, space, or other property encroached upon the Waqf. The tribunal, upon receipt of such application, will make an order of eviction directing that the Waqf property shall be vacated by all persons who may be in occupation thereof by any part thereof, provided that the tribunal may, before taking an order of eviction, give an opportunity of being heard to the person against whom the application of eviction has been made. If any person refuses or fails to comply with the order of eviction within 45 days from the date of effecture of the order, the chief executive officer or any person duly authorized by him in this behalf may evict that person from and take possession of the Waqf property. समझ में भी कुछ नहीं आया और सुन के भी अच्छा नहीं लगा. So let me get this straight. The Waqf decides in its wisdom that a property is Waqf property. It then serves a notice to the encroacher. Subsequently, it takes the matter to the Waqf tribunal, headed by all Muslims. And the tribunal decides on the nature of the said property and orders eviction. The terror continues paragraph after paragraph, section upon section. Let me read out section 85, bar of jurisdiction of civil courts. Quote, no suit or other legal proceeding shall lie in any civil court in respect of any dispute, question, or other matter relating to any Waqf property or other matter which is required by or under this act to be determined by a tribunal, unquote. Bravo. In fact, even the Supreme Court declared in 2019 that a civil court in India has no jurisdiction in the matter of a suit pertaining to a Waqf property. Let me remind you of the ground reality. All this legalese is fine, but the ground reality is that Waqf tribunal decision can only be overturned by a long and financially draining legal process. That is only possible in the recent times. Earlier, you couldn't even do that. The Waqf knows this. In a country where 40 crore cases are pending, harassment through legal procedure that stems from the inner offices of an all-appeasing government, executive and judiciary, is a sword that is sharper and more potent than Khalid's. How, one may then ask, has the Waqf Act 1995, that is patently unfit to be applied to leave alone a mental asylum, has been applied to a nation of 1.3 billion people, assuming the two are not one and the same? Remember, there is nothing in the act that safeguards the religious properties of Hindus being appropriated by the Waqf. This itself violates not only the principles of natural justice, but also multiple articles of our constitution beginning from 14, 15 and 25. In fact, BJP's enfant terrible, Ashwini Kupan Upadhyay, who will figure a lot in my lecture, recently filed a petition in the Supreme Court challenging the validity of the Waqf Act. His plea was that the Waqf board has Muslim MPs, MLAs, legislators, civil servants, lawyers, scholars as its members, and they are remunerated by the taxpayer, even though the state doesn't collect money from mosques. How is this secularism, he asked. The Supreme Court refused to entertain the plea and threw it out. The judge called the petition, quote, abstract. That judge is now and will remain for the next many years the Chief Justice of India. The mayhem continues. Here is section 28 that outlines the power of the district magistrate, additional district magistrate and subdivisional magistrate to implement the direction of the Waqf board. Quote, subject to the provisions of this act and the rules made thereunder, the district magistrate, or in his absence an additional district magistrate, or in his absence a subdivisional magistrate of a district in the state shall be responsible for implementation of the decisions of the board which may be conveyed to the chief executive officers, and the board may, wherever it considers necessary, seek directions from the tribunal for the implementation of its decisions, unquote. What was it that one of the main protagonists of Vivek Agnihotri's film said? Government bhale hi inki ho, system to hamara hai. Well, सिस्टम ही नहीं, यहाँ तो डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैजिस्ट्रेट, एडिशनल डिस्ट्रिक्ट मैजिस्ट्रेट, सब डिविजनल मैजिस्ट्रेट भी हमारे लगते हैं. दिल नहीं भरा लगता आपका. Well, here then is section 107. Now in law, there is something called the statute of limitation. That is, the time period for acting on a dispute or filing of a suit is set by law. And this law is enacted through the Limitations Act 1963. But wait, section 107, quote, Act 36 of 1963 will not apply for recovery of Waqf properties. Nothing contained in the Limitation Act 1963 shall apply to any suit for possession of immovable property comprising in any Waqf or possession of any interest in such property, unquote. What this means is that the Waqf can lay claim to and recover any property it wishes to without having to worry about the passage of time. After all, time hai kya? The Waqf, as you would have realized by now, is a parallel government, wholly sanctioned by our own government. It has, through its overarching board, its own legislature, through its surveyors and estate and compliance officers, its own executive, and through its tribunal, its own judiciary. And through this act, through its application, a message is sent to every citizen of this country. We are a special people. And that message is all-pervasive and uncompromising. And it is this message that allows Muslims, even rational and logical and educated Muslim, to claim that the Gyan Vyapi mosque built atop the Grand Kashi Vishwanath temple is on Waqf land. So, was the Grand Kashi Vishwanath temple demolished by the genocidal monster Aurangzeb, and as confirmed through his own certified biography, Masir-e-Alamgiri, also on Waqf land? Is this the message that allows Muslims, even rational and logical and educated Muslims, to claim that the 1500-year-old iconic Manandiya Vali Chandrasekhara Swami temple in Tamil Nadu is on Waqf land? I ask you, how can a 1500-year-old Hindu temple be adjudged by Waqf to be on Islamic land when Islam is only 1300 years old? How? गंगा जमुना तहसीब बोल बोल के गंगा भी ले ली और यमुना भी ले ली. The more you read on Waqf, the more you realize that bulk of its muscle is flexed not only through the draconian Waqf Act, but also through a letter that Prime Minister Indira Gandhi wrote during the emergency, ordering all states to strictly obey her diktats. If the Waqf properties, she wrote, have gone into adverse possession of state government departments, the Waqf board could well start legal proceedings against the concerned departments. And where costly buildings have been put up by the state on Waqf land and their vacation is not feasible, the state government may enter into permanent leases with the Waqf board after paying to the board the bulk of the market value as premium. I understand, she further wrote, that Waqf boards have sent your governments lists of Waqf properties in the possession of government departments. Please see that these are dealt with as suggested above. A periodic review should be undertaken and a monthly report sent to me. Waqf, as ordained by the committee and as agreed to by the center, should be treated differently from individual landlords and therefore exempt from the Rent Control Acts. The Waqf only asked the Congress to bend. The Congress decided to crawl. In fact, during the dying days of the UPA, the Waqf Properties Eviction of Unauthorized Occupants Bill 2014 was tabled in the Rajya Sabha, giving draconian and overarching powers to the Waqf eviction officer to demolish whatever it considered as an encroachment of Waqf property. I am sorry, Yogi Adityanath ji, but read this bill. It is the humble Waqf estate officer and not you who is the original bulldozer Baba. Through this tabled bill, not only was every order made by the Waqf estate officer to be considered final, it could also not be called into question in any original suit or application, and no injunction could be granted by any court against it. But things didn't just stop at injunction. The bill barred any Indian court to have jurisdiction to entertain any suit concerning the eviction of any person from any Waqf property or demolition of any structure or fixture from any Waqf property. ये लिखता कौन है ये ऐसी legalese? I would really love to meet that guy. Luckily for us, encroachers of Allah's land and that hard Congress went away in 2014 and was replaced by the soft Congress. Appeasement continues, if not through this draconian bill, at least in the interim through the 1995 Act. That the Waqf Act 1995 is blatantly communal, discriminatory, unconstitutional and draconian is not in contention. One only must read its clauses, and I've read a few, and sections to realize what a rotten hand Hindus have been dealt with through this act. What adds to the absurdity is the fact that this is now a perpetual motion machine, gobbling up land, property, and government largesse with speed and stealth. 10 years ago, the Waqf owned only 400,000 acres. Now it's 800,000 acres. With every passing day, it is insatiable in its appetite, as though out to prove Dr. Ambedkar and his profound prophecy of Muslims under divine obligation to convert Darul Harb into Darul Islam. It is no longer an arcane endowment that is centuries old. It is an ever-growing mutant, having perfectly adapted to the appeasing and virtue-signaling state. The Hindus who, during the partition, fled what is now Pakistan and came to India, their property out there was promptly confiscated and either distributed to the Muslim citizenry or taken up by the government of Pakistan. Not so the case with Muslims who from India went over to Pakistan. Their property was handed over to Waqf. And as a result, the Hindu refugees who came to stay on this land are paying rent that is subject to arbitrary increases. And the injustice continues. Hindus must now beg for Waqf land to celebrate their festival, as is what happened recently in Karnataka. This when the governments of both center and state, as I said, have usurped hundreds of thousands of acres of temple land and are responsible for more than 110,000 temples losing lakhs of crores in rental incomes. There is no such act for Hindus. There is no such act for Sikhs. There is no such act for Christians. There is no such act even for Muslims in Muslim majority countries like Turkey, Sudan, Egypt. Welcome to the Islamic Republic of India. This is not our future. This is now our present. The fourth reason, the RTE Act. Number 4, the RTE. All religious schools are equal, but some are less equal than others. This paraphrasing of George Orwell's parodic commandment typifies the thinking of the state when it comes to Hindu-run schools and educational institutions. The Right to Education Act, or the RTE, is the proverbial Moses staff that makes sure this commandment is obeyed. The RTE in itself is a worthy undertaking that states as its preamble, quote, an act to provide for free and compulsory education to all children of the age of 6 to 14 years, unquote. But in terms of discrimination, at once casual and concrete, very few acts match up to the RTE. The act was passed, of course, by the Congress-led UPA back in 2009. Tellingly, it remains in force in the present-day fascist Hindu Rashtra. As the saying goes, Sarkar bhale tumhari ho, system to hamara hai. Simply put, the RTE has and continues to destroy Hindu schools and institutions. Perhaps that is the overarching goal of secularism, to allow the prospering of every other religion, its belief systems, its way of life, its cultural values, its educational methods, its wisdom, its books and scriptures, except Hinduism. And after Hinduism is dead, we will remember it fondly and exalt its glory like we do for every other extinct civilization and culture. This is what is taxidermy fetish. There are numerous provisions under the RTE that selectively apply only to non-minority schools. Like, for example, you cannot have a capitation fee or screen students you want admitted. The reimbursement of fee by the government is never timely, forcing the school to go under debt, even shut shop. You would have to have a government-mandated selection procedure for teachers, one that includes a quota-driven recruitment. There are several building and infrastructural restrictions and requirements that a school must comply with. The list is endless. But the overarching draconian provision of the RTE that is proving to be a death knell for privately run Hindu educational institutions is its order that 25% of the seats must be allotted to children belonging to the economically weaker sections, or EWS, and other disadvantaged groups. This does not apply to minority schools. So the onus of serving the economically weaker section of our society rests solely on Hindu-run schools and not on Muslim or Christian-run institutions. In 2017, 3 years after the heralding of the fascist Hindu Rashtra, the National Independent School Alliance, NISA, compiled a list of schools in 12 states that had been asked to shut down by the governments for non-compliance to the RTE's draconian provisions. And as the RTE primarily applies to non-minority schools, one can safely assume these were Hindu-run schools. As many as 7,000 schools in Maharashtra alone, the bastion of Hindavi Swaraj, the keeper of the Hindutva flame, had been told to shut down. We need to understand that the threat of closure doesn't just intimidate the school, it scares the pupils and the parents too. It has been 5 years since NISA implored the center to relook at the RTE and ease the draconian anti-Hindu strictures. The Hindu Rashtra government is silent. Now, as the famous lines go, जिसका कोई नहीं उसका तो खुदा है यारों, ये मैं नहीं कहता किताबों में लिखा है यारों. Which book, you may ask? Well, in a secular nation, we only have one book to fall back on. So let us look at our constitution. Because if discrimination is cast in stone, we must at least examine the stone. The stone to begin with is Article 30. I now quote verbatim. Article 30, 1. All minorities, whether based on religion or language, shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. 1A. In making any law providing for the compulsory acquisition of any property of any educational institution established and administered by a minority referred to in Clause 1, the state shall ensure that the amount fixed by or determined under such law for the acquisition of such property is such as would not restrict or abrogate the right guaranteed under that clause. 2. The state shall not, in granting aid to educational institutions, discriminate against any educational institution on the ground that it is under the management of a minority, whether based on religion or language. I'm wondering if the same guy who wrote the Constitution also wrote the Waqf Act is as difficult to understand. But a direct fallout of not only the stricture of this article, but its words and composition is that Muslims, a majority in Kashmir, Sikhs, a majority in Punjab, and Christians, a majority in Nagaland, are still considered minority and can run their schools that will not be subject to the RTE. What's going on here? Let us now look at the toothless Article 28. Toothless because both the central and state governments have discovered enough loopholes in it to violate this article at will to placate their vote bank. The article states, 1, no religion instruction shall be provided in any educational institution wholly maintained out of state funds. 2, nothing in Clause 1 shall apply to an educational institution which is administered by the state but has been established under any endowment or trust which requires that religious instruction shall be imparted in such institution. 3, no person attending any educational institution recognized by the state or receiving aid out of state funds shall be required to take part in any religious instruction that may be imparted in such institution or to attend any religious worship that may be conducted in such institution or in any premises attached thereto unless such person, or if such person is a minor, his guardian has given his consent thereto cultural and educational rights. Couple this with Article 26 of our Constitution that ordains, please bear with me because if I had to suffer this, I want you to suffer this as well. छोड़ूंगा नहीं, मैंने ये पढ़ा है तो. Article 26, quote, freedom to manage religious affairs subject to public order, morality, and health, unquote. And that, quote, every religious denomination or any section thereof shall have the right to establish and maintain institutions for religious and charitable purposes, to manage its own affairs in matters of religion, to own, acquire movable and immovable property, and to administer such property in accordance with law. Couple this with Article 26, 28, and 30 and read both articles side by side and you will realize what you're up against. But I run ahead of myself because let me now read clause 5 of Article 15 of our Constitution that was brought in by the UPA in 2006 as the 93rd Amendment. In Article 15 of the Constitution, after clause 4, the following clause shall be inserted, namely 5. Nothing in this article or in subclause G or clause 1 of Article 19 shall prevent the state from making any special provision by law for the advancement of any socially or educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes or the scheduled tribes insofar as such special provisions relate to their admission to educational institutions, including private educational institutions, whether aided or unaided by state, other than the minority educational institutions referred to in clause 1 of Article 30. Now, Article 15, that prohibits discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth, already had clause 4 that allowed states to make special provisions for the advancement of any socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, but it did not exclude minority institutions. And that put the onus on the minority to also contribute to the society and work towards the upliftment of our socially and educationally backward classes of citizens or for the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And I'm sorry, this was unacceptable to the Congress, as well as, I must add, the BJP, because this amendment was passed with the latter's support. I hope you can see it very clearly now that it is this 93rd Amendment which is the staff meant to establish the commandments of Article 26 and 30. And it is because of the brandishing of this staff that the RTE does not apply to minority-run schools, barring a ubiquitous exception of a ban on corporal punishment that all Indian schools must of course compulsorily follow. To summarize the chain of events, the government applies RTE rules selectively to Hindu-run schools, orders them to maintain a 25% EWS quota, doesn't provide fee reimbursement on time, so much so that back in 2019, as many as 4,000 schools threatened to go on a strike against delays in fee reimbursement. And unconcerned, the government threatened the schools and blackmailed them with land occupancy provisions just to escape paying the reimbursement. The schools are forced to hike fee for all pupils in order to escape debt and closure. The fee increase forces Hindu parents to shift their children to other schools. More and more Hindu parents take their children away from Hindu schools, and these children are then welcomed by schools run by minorities. And by virtue of the religious obligations and directive principles of the Constitution laid down for the believers, where preaching, proselytization, and conversion are religious duties, these children, Hindu children, are inevitably, sometimes subtly, sometimes directly, put under pressure to convert. Meanwhile, the Hindu school is forced to close down. A recent report estimates that the RTE is responsible for the closure of more than 10,000 Hindu-run schools. A 2017 CAG report noted that the release of funds by the center to schools was sometimes delayed by as much as 307 days, almost a year. Such delays not only lead to outright closure of schools, they also result in abandoning any plans for expansion or upgradation of infrastructure. Ironical, because these are the criteria to be fulfilled by schools under the RTE. More importantly, even if the government pay the EVS pupil fee, albeit a year late, the school would still have to shell out for textbooks, uniforms, transport, and other ancillary things every school-going child needs, especially when his parents are cripplingly poor. The authority that decides if a school is exempt from the RTE is the National Commission for Minority Educational Institution, NCMEI. This body, although is quasi-judicial in its directives, cannot have a Hindu as its member. In fact, the same enfant terrible BJP leader Ashwani Upadhyay filed a PIL. कितनी PIL file करोगे? सरकार तुम्हारी है. He filed a PIL seeking to challenge the NCMEI, the act, and to allow Hindus to be declared as minorities in states and union territories where they are, well, minorities. This is logical and rational, especially because it has wide-ranging repercussions on the survival of Hindu-run schools in these states and union territories. Hindus are now a minority in Jammu and Kashmir, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, Manipur, Punjab, Nagaland, Meghalaya, Ladakh, and Lakshadweep. But one entity has opposed the BJP leader's petition, calling it frivolous. No, that entity was not the Congress or the Church or Darul Uloom. That entity was the BJP central government. The BJP leader's own government called his petition, quote, untenable and misconceived in law, and told the court that the petition was, quote, not in larger public or national interest, unquote. The center, led by the Hindutva forces, backed by the same discriminatory National Commission for Minorities Education, NCMI, under whose act only Muslims, Christians, Jains, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Parsis are listed as minorities. Following widespread outrage, the Modi government has only now asked more time from the court to rethink on the matter. Meanwhile, Hindu-run religious and linguistic schools continue to close under the burden of discriminatory RTE rules. The BJP leader, Ashwini Upadhyay, lamented, हमें तो अपनों ने लूटा, गैरों में कहाँ दम था? मेरी कश्ती वहीं डूबी जहाँ पानी कम था. But मैं अश्विनी जी की दाद दूंगा, he has not switched over to Congress. So, if there is only one thing more cruel than not allowing Hindu temples to run their own educational institutions without fear of state intervention and control, it is not allowing Hindus to run their own educational institutions without fear of state intervention and control. And if there is only one thing more cruel than the fact that both these cruelties are being subjected on the Hindus, it is that they are being subjected by the Hindus, belonging to a Hindu government in this Hindu Rashtra. The fifth reason. I was going along merrily when some gentleman came and gave us a note that say, sir, please don't break the momentum, skip the break. So I want to ask the audience, shall I carry on? Okay. The fifth reason. 5, legislations that appease non-Hindus but target Hindus. In Hinduism, religion is an offshoot of the way of life, while in Islam, way of life is an offshoot of religion. Because of this distinction, one is amenable to change and reform, while the other, leave alone reform, even changing a punctuation in the holy verses and commandments, is expressly forbidden. And herein lies the dichotomy that plagues our state. We will try and reform one religion and its practices, but will recoil from reforming the other. We will break and remove the shackles of intolerance from one, but will jangle and rattle them with pride for the other. We will constitutionalize reform in one through legislations, code bills, laws, IPC sections, but will not only stay away from bringing in similar legislations for the other, we will even overturn Supreme Court judgments that aim to bring in limited reform. Bigamy, for example, is banned under Indian law. Some of you may be disappointed here, but specifically section 494 of the IPC, and it carries a 7-year jail term. But it is permitted under section 2 of the Muslim Personal Law Shariat Application Act 1937. This is not to suggest that bigamy should be allowed for Hindus, but rather to highlight the double standards when it comes to Muslims. Another case in point is the Prevention of Communal and Targeted Violence, Access to Justice and Reparations Bill 2011, or the so-called Communal Violence Bill, that was drafted by the Sonia Gandhi constituted and monitored NAC. Fortunately, it never saw the light of day. If it had, it would have been yet another instrument of discrimination against the majority Hindu community. That's because the revised draft changed the definition of the group targeted in communal violence. Henceforth, this group would have meant either a religious or linguistic minority or scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. This essentially meant that only minorities and SC/STs could be victims, while the perpetrators of communal violence would always be the majority, meaning Hindus. The absurdity of this bill dawned when people realized that Hindus would be branded as perpetrators even when they were the minority. For example, in Kashmir or in Punjab or in Kerala, when SC/STs were subtracted from the Hindu population. Outrageously, this definition was to be used even in cases of sexual assault. When Harsh Mandar, one of the NAC members who drafted this ludicrous bill, was asked to explain reasons for such blatant anti-Hindu sentiments, he retorted, and I quote, "There is an institutional bias against the minorities that needed to be corrected. In cases of communal violence, the entire criminal justice system has been against minorities. It is to correct this institutional bias that we needed this bill," unquote. Someone should inform this Mr. Harsh Mandar that if at all the entire criminal justice system has been against a community in recent memory, it is against the Kashmiri Hindus, who 30 years later are still seeking justice for the rape, murder, and ethnic cleansing and genocide perpetrated against their community by Muslims, the so-called minority. But according to this bill, these crimes couldn't have happened because the minority couldn't have committed them. Perhaps that is why the Supreme Court also refuses to open these cases of atrocities. Because, hey, they never happened. The truth is that the state has been blackmailed and browbeaten to such an extent that the so-called liberal, progressive, conscientious feminists outrage on Karwa Chauth, but slither away under their favorite Parthasarthi rock. Only those from the JNU would understand this. When it comes to giving equal inheritance rights to Muslim women, these feminists will talk of anything but the fact that even courts in our country have begun to ratify the allowance for Muslims to marry on attainment of puberty, violating the most sacrosanct of our laws, namely the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act. And the High Court judge who okayed the marriage of a pubescent Muslim girl is now in the Supreme Court. He was one of the judges who blamed Nupur Sharma for the beheading of the tailor Kanhaiya Lal. They will claim banning triple talaq is an invasion of privacy. I'm not joking, actually happened. And an assault on one's freedom of expression. They will not castigate Owaisi or his party for vehemently opposing the removal of leprosy as a grounds for divorce, because AIMPLB believes leprosy, a disease completely curable, is sufficient grounds for divorce. They will not side with Shah Bano. They will abuse anyone who pleads for one India, one law. They will even applaud Mehbooba Mufti, who recently called for introducing stoning as a punishment in Kashmir. This is the kind of in-your-face, state-sanctioned hypocrisy we are dealing with. Hindus and Hinduism stand no chance. When did they ever? For centuries, those who have ruled India have sought to bring in reforms only in Hinduism. The British even set up the B.N. Rao Committee in 1941 to exclusively codify only Hindu laws. The report of this committee formed the template for the 1951 Hindu Code Bills. The bill was adopted in 1956, and it gives, creditably so, much needed rights to Hindu women, while at the same time providing equality to the affected parties in a range of civil matters, from succession to marriage to property rights to guardianship, adoption and maintenance. Any reform is good. It signifies helpful mutations are being accumulated, that the living, breathing organism is adapting to changing times, that it is evolving. And because it is, it will survive. But why should only Hindus and Hinduism be reformed? What about Christians and Christianity? Muslims and Islam? Everyone is aware of Dr. Ambedkar's criticism of Hinduism as a religion, as a way of life. The left loses no opportunity to highlight this in books, in debates, in documentaries, even in parliament. But cat gets their tongue when it comes to highlighting his criticism of Islam. Indeed, Dr. Ambedkar was so appalled by selective criticism of Hinduism that he wrote, and I quote, "The social evils that characterize the Hindu society have been well known. But books that expose these evils and call their authors at the bar of the world to answer for their sins create the unfortunate impression throughout the world that while the Hindus are groveling in the mud of these social evils and are conservative, the Muslims in India are free from them and, as compared to the Hindus, are a progressive people. That such an impression should prevail is surprising to those who know the Muslim society in India at close quarters. Take the caste system. Islam speaks of brotherhood. Everyone infers that Islam must be free from caste, but this is not the case. Caste among Muslims has remained. There can thus be no manner of doubt that the Muslim society in India is afflicted by the same social evils as afflict the Hindu society. Indeed, the Muslims have all the social evils of the Hindus and something more. That something more is the compulsory system of parda for Muslim women, unquote. In 1975, a 62-year-old mother of five, Shah Bano Begum, was thrown out of her house and onto the streets of Indore. She had been married for 43 years to Muhammad Ahmad Khan, who earned rupees 5,000 a month, a princely sum in those days. 3 years later, destitute and without a roof over her head, Shah Bano approached the lower courts asking for a maintenance sum of rupees 500 a month under section 125 1A of the Code of Criminal Procedure. What she got instead was a talaq. In his defense, her husband told the court he had already provided rupees 3,000 as meher or dowry during iddat, a period of waiting that a divorced woman must adhere to before she can remarry. The court sided with the wife and asked the husband to pay a reduced maintenance sum of rupees 25 per month. The husband refused, citing the rights given to him under the Muslim personal law. The case went to the High Court. This time, the husband was directed to pay a maintenance sum of rupees 179.2 per month under section 125. The husband said nothing doing and appealed to the Supreme Court. In a landmark judgment, the Supreme Court dismissed Muhammad Ahmad Khan's appeal and directed him to pay maintenance to his ex-wife as laid down by the High Court. Does the Muslim personal law, asked the court, impose no obligation upon the husband to provide for the maintenance of his divorced wife? Undoubtedly, the Muslim husband enjoys the privilege of being able to discard his wife whenever he chooses to do so, for reasons good, bad, or indifferent. Indeed, for no reason at all. It is a matter of deep regret that some of the interveners who supported the husband took up an extreme position by displaying an unwanted zeal to defeat the right to maintenance of women who are unable to maintain themselves, unquote. It is not clear who among the bench penned the concluding words of the judgment. What is clear is that whoever he was is worthy of praise. Quote, "We understand the difficulties involved in bringing persons of different faiths and persuasions on a common platform. But a beginning has to be made if the Constitution is to have any meaning. Inevitably, the role of the reformer has to be assumed by the courts because it is beyond the endurance of sensitive minds to allow injustice to be suffered when it is so palpable," unquote. To utter these words takes barely a minute, to write them down perhaps a little longer. But to think them through takes decades of learning and scholarship and a degree of objectivity that demands detachment. And you know you have failed when it all comes to naught. Section 125, the court concluded, is truly secular in character, whether the spouses are Hindus or Muslims, Christians or Parsis, pagans or heathens. is wholly irrelevant in the application of these provisions. It would make no difference as to what religion is professed by the neglected wife, child, or parent, unquote. That was the one blunder our Supreme Court committed. Who or what is secular is not to be decided by the learned men and women of the highest court in the land. It is instead the sole prerogative of the politicians. Only they have the sacrosanct right to deliver this verdict, and exactly a year later, deliver they did. The Rajiv Gandhi-led Congress government, beset with issues of corruption, nepotism, and mismanagement, chose the well-traveled route to political expediency and passed the Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Divorce Act 1986. In one fell swoop, the Supreme Court judgment was overturned. The wording of the 1986 Act conveys to the citizens something the politicians thought had been overlooked, perhaps disregarded. Who rules whom? Quote, every application by a divorced woman under Section 125 pending before a magistrate shall be disposed of by such magistrate in accordance with the provision of this Act. Henceforth, the husband was to pay the ex-wife maintenance only during the iddat period. The liability beyond the iddat rested not on the husband, but on those relatives who would receive the ex-wife's property upon her death, following which the Waqf board was to take responsibility. Shah Bano was on the streets again, and India was back to being secular. The sixth reason, judiciary that almost exclusively tries to reform only Hinduism. On July 1, 2022, the Supreme Court Justices Surya Kant and J.B. Pardiwala refused to entertain a plea to curb multiple FIRs against Nupur Sharma for merely quoting what is derived from the revered Islamic scriptures, Sahih al-Bukhari 5134, Book 67, Hadith 70, and Sunnah al-Nasai 3378, Volume 4, Book 26, Hadith 3380. They could have left it at that and dismissed the case and broken for lunch. But they didn't. It is not for me to judge them, because there already is a case pending against me for criminal contempt of court for merely standing with a man who criticized the court. But hear me quote the two justices verbatim and decide for yourself whether their cruel remarks against a hapless, victimized, shunned, discarded, hunted young Hindu woman were not bolstered by decades of institutional vilification, ridicule, and discrimination against Hindus. Things do not happen in isolation. They build upon existing edifices, brick by punishing brick. Would the judges have thrown a non-Hindu petitioner to the wolves similarly? I now quote what they said to Nupur, quote, you have ignited the whole country, and you have the cheek and the courage to come to the court to ask for discretionary relief? You are single-handedly responsible for the burnings in the country. Your statement is responsible for the unfortunate killing in Udaipur. Are you facing a security threat, or have you become a threat to the security of the nation itself? You possess a loose tongue, and you keep on making irresponsible statements. You should apologize to the whole country for your remarks made either for cheap publicity, political agenda, or some nefarious activities. Your petition shows your obstinate character and your arrogance that you think that the magistrate courts are too small for you. Sometimes power goes to your head and people think they have a backup and they can make any kind of statement and go scot-free. You went on a channel and made irresponsible statements without even an inkling of the ramifications and serious consequences, that how seriously it will disturb the fabric of the society. You have a loose tongue, unquote. That the legislature discriminates against Hindus is not news. I have provided enough examples, and plenty more exist, of minority appeasement at the cost of the majority. But what is to be done when the judiciary singles out the Hindus? What is the recourse then? What is the recourse when you find That the fine lady who stands atop our temples of justice belligerent, when you find her sword that is pointing to the skies blunted and her blindfold perforated, when you find her scales rusted, what is the recourse? There is none. Because when the Supreme Court decides to remove discrimination from Islam, it is stopped from doing so by the Parliament. When it decides to remove discrimination or perceived discrimination from Hinduism, it is encouraged to do so by the Parliament. I talk here of the infamous 2018 Sabrimala judgment, the verdict of Supreme Court that went against the temple and its centuries-old tradition, dictated to its keepers by the celibate deity himself. Recall the iconic statement of the dissenting judge Indu Malhotra in the original Sabrimala judgment, I quote, "Notions of rationality cannot be invoked in matters of religion," unquote. Truer words were never spoken. Is it up to the Supreme Court to counsel and inform believers, billions of them, that the holy Ganges could not have emanated from the trusses of Lord Shiva, or that Prophet Muhammad couldn't have traveled to heaven on a winged horse, or that Jesus Christ couldn't have walked on water or turned water to wine? Yes, the courts do have a role to play in intervening and preventing oppressive and hurtful religious practices, but then again, what is hurtful to you and me may not be hurtful to the believer. For example, I believe that stipulating a dress code is oppressive, but can the Supreme Court ban it? If it does, it would be violating the direct commandments of Allah as revealed in the Holy Quran 24, 31, 33, 59, 7, 26. Would that be acceptable to the Muslims as well as to all those liberals and feminists who cheered the Sabrimala verdict that vetoed the discrimination? And to be sure, so-called discrimination, because was it discrimination or perceived discrimination to begin with? After all, there are many Hindu temples where men are barred entry, like the Kamakhya temple, Brahmaji temple, Kumari Amman temple, Atukal Bhagavati temple, Mata temple, and there are many Hindu temples, including many Lord Ayappa temples, where menstruating women are allowed entry. It is only in this particular Lord Ayappa shrine that, because of the vow of the deity to remain celibate, menstruating women in a particular age bracket are not allowed entry. And as for menstruating women, it is expressly forbidden for them to touch the Quran, recite a complete verse, enter a mosque, do salat, perform tawaf, fast or have sex. 5679, 2222, Tirmidhi 315 and Hadith Sharif. So are we now going to redact these verses? There exists a fundamental contradiction between Articles 21, which is right to life, dignity and liberty, and 25, right to practice any religion. If one follows or respects one, it is almost impossible to follow or respect the other. This is because there are tens of thousands of religious commandments, directives, decrees that directly contradict Article 21. If you are a true Catholic woman, you cannot be ordained as a priest. If you are a true Muslim woman, you cannot sing, dance, play sports, drink, fornicate, be a homosexual, wear what you want, or be an apostate. A progressive secular state that correctly removes discriminatory practices from the Hindu religion, but cowers behind a lamppost like a wet cat when it comes to removing discriminatory practice from other religions, is not a progressive secular state. It is a scared state. The truth is that one would have to be an atheist, possibly of the militant variety, to always override Article 25 and support Article 21. I, being a Darwinian atheist, am fine with this. But are you, are the judges, are the politicians, are the millions of my countrymen and women? That is the question. Until the time you answer it, why reform and tinker and restructure and amend only Hinduism while leaving other religions alone? Why bring in legislations and laws and judgments exclusively for Hindus and Hinduism? In 2019, the Tripura High Court banned animal sacrifice, even though Hindus argued that this practice was a centuries-old tantric tradition of worshipping the 10 the 10 Mahavidyas, namely Kali, Tara, Tripura Sundari, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamasta, Dhrumavati, Bagalamukhi, Matangi and Kamala. What the Hindus pleaded was also in keeping with the famous 1954 Shirur Mutt judgment that established the sanctity of an essential religious practice. But the judges would hear none of it. Quote, "No person, including the state, shall be allowed to sacrifice any animal or bird within the precincts of any temple within the state of Tripura," unquote, they wrote. In 2014, the judges of the Himachal Pradesh High Court had similarly banned the 600-year-old tradition of animal sacrifice during Kullu Dasara. In 2017, the quasi-judicial NGT ordered a ban on the tolling of bells and the chanting of shlokas by devotees at Amarnath. Praise the Lord, they simultaneously didn't allow the delivery of azan through loudspeakers there. Or perhaps they indeed did, but the vagaries of the state have meant the order is yet to reach Bholenath's abode. The question to be asked is, why should only the religious Hindu be prevented from conducting animal sacrifice? If the state is against animal sacrifice, and laudably so, then shouldn't it be against all animal sacrifices conducted in the name of religion? But is that the case? If the honorable courts object to the taking of the life of an animal through a religious ritual, do they have the guts to ban halal? Every single day, more than 1 billion Muslims eat meat after this religious ritual has been performed. In fact, it is an essential requirement. The dhabiha, or the prescribed ritual slaughter, must be staged. The incision must be precise and deep, that cuts the carotid artery and the trachea. The blood must be drained completely. This while the animal is still alive. The head of the animal must be aligned to the Kaaba, and it is essential that Bismillah Rahman Rahim be uttered. Furthermore, only a Muslim can perform this slaughter. So according to the honorable judges, this isn't a ritual. In fact, this ritualistic practice has been deemed so cruel in many European countries that it is mandatory to stun the animal before performing halal. But do our judges have the courage to shun selectivity when it comes to animal rights? Hindu festivals and celebrations and sporting events are easy target, be it Jallikattu or Kambala or Naga Panchami or even kite flying during Makar Sankranti. Or believe it or not, restricting the height of the Dahi Handi during the Janmashtami festival. The judges have capped the human pyramid height to 20 feet, saying anything above would inflict harm to the participating humans. Quote, "We know only of Krishna stealing butter. Did he also indulge in acrobatics while stealing it?" The judges mocked. I want to ask the judges, what happens to all their mockery and colorful retorts when it comes to Muharram, where tens of thousands of Muslims openly inflict serious bodily harms to themselves and to others? With whips laced with steel claws that stab deep into the devotee's flesh amid chants of Ya Abbas, Ya Abbas, is that not inflicting harm? But do our milords have the guts to ban this ritual during Muharram? It is the same while banning crackers during Diwali but allowing millions of tons of stubble to be burned during the same month, or millions of trees to be cut during Christmas, or allowing fireworks during New Year celebrations, because apparently only Diwali is increasing the carbon footprint, you see. Only Diwali is contributing to pollution. The rest are purifying the environment. And for those who blame Diwali for the state of Delhi air every year, here is some perspective. An area of 17,900 square kilometers, or 12 times the size of Delhi, is on fire continuously for weeks on end right next to Delhi. 35 million tons of stubble is burnt right under the noses of our judges. Honestly, I am now convinced the only way stubble burning can be banned is if we call it Parali Dahan, a Hindu festival. wherein, according to the Atharva Veda, Lord Vishnu burnt demon king Paralisura when he enslaved Maruts and storm king Rudra. Only then will the judges ban stubble burning. Stubble burning releases 149 million tons of carbon dioxide, which is 55% of all Indian transport carbon dioxide emission. The financial burden of treating the resulting respiratory diseases alone is 154 times more than the cost of the machines needed for stubble extraction. But if our politicians and judges thought like this, we'll be a developed nation. And with our courts acting the way they are towards Hindus and their rituals, can the state be far behind? Dharmapuram Adhinam's Patina Pravesam, the ancient Hindu ritual of carrying the priest with reverence, has now been banned. And that too by invoking clauses of, believe it or not, forced labor. You mean to tell me the devotees are being forced to carry the ponting they so revere? What next? I'll tell you what next. There will soon come a time when the state will ban the pulling of the Lord Jagannath on the pretext of forced labor. But there will never come a time when the state bans Sidia Gestatoria, the tradition of carrying a Christian priest. There will never come a time when the state bans the hoisting of the bulky tazia on dozens of tired, exhausted shoulders during Muharram. There will never come a time when the state bans the tradition of carrying a heavy wooden cross on Eastern parade. This selectivism against only Hindu festivals and religious practices will soon result in a scenario where the Hindus begin to dislike their own traditions. From there, the road to self-loathing is but a few yards away, and we know where that road leads to, forsaking Hinduism itself and accepting another religion. As if on cue, the courts have recently opined that non-Hindus cannot be barred by temples into setting up their shops on temple premises. We cannot allow this, thundered the bench. So let me get this straight. A man whose religion orders him to viscerally hate the Hindu commands him to convert this infidel, and if he can't, then kill him at an opportune moment. A man whose religion tells him no one has the right to be worshipped but Allah, 40:62, that those who deny the Quran, their necks will be shackled, 40:70, that polytheists or Hindus are the worst of creatures, 98:6, that fight against those who do not believe in Allah and who do not adopt Islam, fight them until they give the jizya while they are humbled, 929, that do not marry polytheists or Hindu women unless they believe in Islam, 2:221, that those who disbelieve in our verses, we will drive them into a fire, 4:56, that do not take disbelievers as friends unless they convert and kill them if they refuse, 489. The court orders the Hindu temple to give this man the temple's own land to set up a shop in. Is there a finer example of how entrenched snubbing of Hindu interests has become? There is no other way of saying this. The camel has begun to sneak into the tent. An open sky for Hindus awaits. Seventh reason. 7. Celebrating those who killed and converted millions of Hindus. To visit Nalanda, the ancient place of learning and arguably India's greatest cultural heritage, you need to board a train from Delhi and get down 50 miles from Patna at a place called Bakhtiyarpur. From Bakhtiyarpur, it is a brief and pleasant journey to Nalanda. And when you reach this hallowed place, when you stroll about its manicured lawns and thin brick facades and ruins, you will get to know how this magnificent temple of knowledge and wisdom was charred to the ground by a barbarian, how thousands of scholars perished in the fires that burned for months, how millions of books were reduced to cinders, how a civilization the world envied and admired as a Vishwaguru was lost forever. And you will also get to know that the barbarian who executed this barbaric act was none other than Bakhtiyar. Yes, Bakhtiyar. And we have named not only a railway station, but also a city in his honor. our destruction that even Bakhtiyar could not manage in his lifetime is now complete. 1,000 years later, that we have honored this barbarian is not hurtful enough. What hurts most is that unsatisfied and unsatiated with this hideous self-flagellation, we have endeavored to descend a step further into the dungeons of distorted history and peddled the narrative that Bakhtiyar did not even destroy or set fire to Nalanda. Instead, we have blamed a couple of Hindu beggars for burning down the great city of Nalanda. That's right. Not an invader or his invading army of tens of thousands of barbarians, but rather two gawky little Hindu beggars were responsible for destroying the greatest ancient university there ever was. This is neither the time or place, and nor do I have the inclination to narrate to you in detail the sorry figments of the leftist historian D.N. Jha's lobotomized mind and its imaginings. The fact that he never quoted a primary source for his assertion, the fact that the first English translation of Jha's source, Pak Sam John Zhang, was carried out as late as 100 years ago, the fact that it never even mentions the two Hindu beggars. But the fact remains that the Jhas have won this war of narratives because Bakhtiyar lives. For the sake of Islam, I became a wanderer. I battled infidels and the Hindus, and I was determined to become a martyr. Thanks be to Allah, I became a Ghazi. This is a direct quote of Babur from his Babarnama. There is a Babur Road in central Delhi, barely a mile from the Prime Minister's residence. Babur lives. Hindu gods and their idols are as dirty as they are ugly and horrible to look at. And witnessing the destruction of temple idols gives me so much joy. The man who said this was also the chief architect of the Goa Inquisition that led to the conversion, torture, and murder of thousands of Hindus. His name was Saint Francis Xavier. Every year, millions of Indians, including our Hindu nationalist Prime Minister Narendra Modi, venerate him. Saint Francis Xavier lives. Sikandar Shah Miri, 1389 to 1413, who commissioned Jamia Masjid and is still eulogized and worshipped in Kashmir, collected 3 khirwars or 210 kilograms of sacred thread from Kashmiri Hindus before he burned them. A single sacred thread weighs 7 grams. Again, I shall leave it to the mathematicians among you to calculate the sheer scale of this genocide. But Sikandar Shah Miri lives. I will raise these Ansagar Hindu temples to the ground. I have come to India to fight the holy war against the infidels, unquote. The man who said this was Khwaja Moinuddin Chishti, the Hanafi Sufi saint who fought alongside the demonic Muhammad Ghori and unsparingly converted Hindus. Every year, millions of Indians, including our Hindu nationalist Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, offer a chadar at his mazar and venerate him. Moinuddin Chishti lives. We know more about the Mughals than our warriors. We know more about Mughals than we know about Shivaji and Rana Pratap and Prithviraj Chauhan. Why? Because history that is written by the victors is peddled by the vanquished, and we have been vanquished. This is a country where people still go and pray at the grave of the monster Aurangzeb who beheaded Guru Tegh Bahadur, decapitated Sambhaji Maharaj, demolished Kashi Vishwanath, murdered 4.6 million Hindus. This is a country where Guru Arjan Dev was forced to sit on a hot plate and literally cooked alive by the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. And what do? We immortalize Jahangir in our films as that affable, feather-toying romantic Salim. This is a country where a celebrated historian, Ram Guha, didn't want Delhi roads to be named after Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, the man who birthed an empire stretching from Peshawar to Plassey, because in Guha's words, he was a, quote, little-known regional figure and a feudal lord who endorsed caste hierarchies, unquote. This is a country where we eulogize the invaders who over century after relentless century perpetrated the largest genocide in human history and murdered 80 million of us. A figure arrived at authoritatively by historians K.S. Lal and Will Durant. This is a country where Kareena Kapoor and Saif Ali Khan take pride in naming their son Taimur. Where Akhilesh Yadav takes pride in having the nickname Tipu. Our history has been written by those who hated Hindus, Hinduism and Hindustan. Our history is being written by those who hate Hindus, Hinduism and Hindustan. There are hundreds of examples, but just one would suffice. Tipu Sultan. Read his manifesto, written in his own words. It is a terrifying proclamation calling for all Muslims to come together to wage jihad. Annihilation of the infidels is our sacred duty, he writes. The Hindus of Coorg suffered a particularly brutal onslaught. Murders, tortures, forced conversions. Even dead Hindus were converted, even dead Hindus. Tipu destroyed more than 800 temples, 27 churches, captured 60,000 Christians, converted 30,000, killed thousands. Chroniclers Lewis Rice and R.D. Palsokar believed the figure could be as high as 8,000 temples. Descendants of Mandayam Iyengars do not celebrate Diwali till this day. Ever wondered why? Tipu butchered them on this day. Read Bartholomeo's personal account of Tipu Sultan's butchery in Calicut. Men, women and children were paraded naked and trampled by elephants. And yet, we call Tipu a symbol of communal harmony. We cheer when the statue of the evil racist Leopold is demolished in Belgium. But we celebrate Tipu Jayanti. Because tyrants who murder Hindus are not tyrants but heroes. Praising Tipu is like praising King Leopold for building roads and ports in Congo, balancing out ivory trade and a million murders. There is no difference between Tipu Sultan apologists and Holocaust deniers. Twisted minds in need of immediate medical intervention. And yet they exist in their millions. In years to come, I am sure Yaqub Memnun's grave would become as popular a worshipping place as Aurangzeb's is today, visited and prayed at by politicians and film stars. The same Aurangzeb who was worse than Baghdadi 350 years before ISIS. The genocide he perpetrated claimed, as I said, 4.6 million Hindu lives. If an incident could muster a million spine-chilling imaginings, it would be that of the one in 1675 under broad daylight in Chandni Chowk, where Guru Tegh Bahadur was beheaded on the orders of Aurangzeb. And yet, we have cities and roads named after him. We have his tomb consecrated and turned into a memorial. 75 years have gone, but we still haven't got independence from brainwashing and servitude. And that is why in years to come, Yaqub Memon would be celebrated just like Aurangzeb is. After all, tens of thousands attended his funeral, tears flowing down their cheeks. People will come and pray at his grave, seek his blessings. From the Aryans to Aurangzeb, from St. Xavier to Shivaji, our historians have chosen what to hide, what to invent, and what to disclose. The singular reason for this is the craving for patronage of an ideology, a government, an ecosystem, or a clique. Villains are made into heroes and heroes into villains. We like it this way. Our historical figures are to be worshipped. They are to be made into gods, into atlases who carry the weight of our ideologies and our biases on the nape of their necks. History as myth, myth as history. It confirms to what we really are, unsure of our present, fearful of our future, fear and trembling. That is what this is. And the whole nation chugs along on this dead yet simmering coal, a journey to nowhere, slow, halting, tiring, until you realize what the grand plan always is, to appropriate invaders and to forget our own heroes. How else do we explain appropriating foreign destructive ideologies and their proponents like Karl Marx, Mao, and Che Guevara? Can you now appreciate how reading and imbibing a particular history can weaken a nation? Because when you eulogize monsters like Che and Mao and Pol Pot, you also decide to walk on their paths. You weaken the nation. Look at what the communists did to Bengal. Look at what they did to anything they have touched, and they still venerate Stalin and Mao. Mao, who killed 63 million of his own people. And if you think I'm talking abstract and philosophical gibberish, recall who wanted to scuttle the Indo-US nuclear deal, who was against the Green Revolution, against river linking, against dams. Recall who forbade the setting up of blood donation camps during the 1962 war with China. Recall who hailed the Tiananmen Square massacre. Recall who was against liberalization. They are still very much among us in our society, in our committees, in our universities, in our parliament. The more we are ignorant of our history, the more we are taught it wrongly, the more we clear the path for them to return to power. History for us is either to be hidden or invented. We tell and retell what we like of it, and of what we don't, we scrunch it up and slip it under the mattress like a plastic bag. For the victors, a quill to write history with. For the vanquished, the burden to peddle it. But we forget history is not homeopathy. It does not work as a placebo when diluted. It simply disappears. Every city a Hindu lives in, every school he attends, every university he goes to, every road he walks on, he cannot escape being confronted by his cruel past that raped, mutilated, murdered, pillaged, and converted him. He cannot escape being humiliated by it, pummeled again by it, by the force of history, condensed and packed into a punch that lands and lands and lands and keeps on landing until the Hindu is lying face down on the canvas, blood-laced spit bubbling from his lips. This is a Hindu Rashtra, they say. I ask them, is there a Hitler Road in Tel Aviv? Eighth and final reason, the Places of Worship Act, 1991. History that is written by the victors, I had remarked earlier, is peddled by the vanquished. And as far as I'm concerned, one of the most barbaric legislations ever peddled in India is the 1991 Places of Worship Act. But in 2019, the virtue signaling Supreme Court in its Ayodhya judgment willfully ratified this act that obligates maintaining all religious places except Ram Janambhoomi as they were on August 15, 1947. A 75-year-old date in an 8,000-year-old civilization. Historical injustice of Kashi or Mathura can now never be addressed unless Parliament overrides not only this barbaric act, but also the Supreme Court's perfidious ratification of it. A legal recourse to correct historical injustices cannot be denied in a democracy, and this is not a Hindu issue. I, as a Darwinian atheist, demand the abrogation of the Place of Worship Act. If a mosque had been demolished by a Hindu king and a temple built on it, then I, a kafir, and an atheist for whom Islam sanctions death penalty, would have fought for the rights of Muslims to legally get back their mosque. History is but a collection of images, pregnant, expecting, screaming. And if an image could deliver 1,000,000 words, it would be that of the Nandi waiting patiently for 400 years for his Lord to emerge. Will he have to wait for another 400 years? Nations weaken not because of their past, but rather by how they are taught it. For 70 years, we have been taught to celebrate the Mathura Eidgah and the Gyanvyapi Mosque as monuments to Hindu-Muslim unity and not as what they really are, cruel historical injustices. Because for 70 years, we have been taught to forget cruel historical injustices. From Somnath to Kashi Vishwanath, Babarpur to Bakhtiyarpur, from Allahabad to Aurangabad, these injustices have deliberately been made visible, as though to lionize the debasement, celebrate the humiliation. And the irony is that the same people who have taught us this, drilled this self-loathing in us, these same people want others to fight historical injustice around the world. They condemn barbarians of the West hither to worship like the Confederacy generals Rhodes, Churchill, Pizarro, Murray, Colston, Leopold. They celebrate their roads and buildings being renamed, their statues being brought down. But here in India, This same set eulogizes the barbarians like Tipu, Aurangzeb, Babar, Khilji. They celebrate the destruction of Kashi, Mathura, Ayodhya, Martand. It is a heady mix of hatred for Hinduism and love for jihadism, hatred for India and love for its breakup. To show you the extent of the conceit, let me read out to you a passage from the 2019 Ayodhya judgment where the honorable judges exult and willfully ratify this Places of Worship Act. To recreate the imagery of what those who sat that sultry day in that court and heard these words uttered by the highest court of the land, I will provide after every sentence phonetic equivalents of whips lashing on one's back in a self-flagellating orgy of destruction and humiliation. Quote, the Places of Worship Act imposes a bar on the institution of fresh suits or legal proceedings, with the only exception other than Babri Masjid Ram Janambhoomi case being appeals or proceedings pending at the commencement of the law on the ground that conversion of a place of worship had taken place after 15th August 1947. Whoosh, thwack. The Places of Worship Act is thus a legislative intervention which preserves non-retrogression as an essential feature of our secular values, being as it is intrinsically related to the obligations of a secular state. It reflects the commitment of India to the equality of all religions. Above all, the Places of Worship Act is an affirmation of the solemn duty which was cast upon the state to preserve and protect the equality of all faiths as an essential constitutional value, a norm which has the status of being a basic feature of the Constitution. Whack. There is a purpose underlying the enactment of the Places of Worship Act, which is that the law speaks to our history and to the future of the nation, unquote. Are you lacerated enough? Is the wound satisfyingly deep? Is it oozing blood, glorious blood? This act speaks to our history and to the future of our nation. I am sorry, but this act airbrushes our history and destroys our future. Oil the whip. Run them lovingly through the hollow of your palm. Prepare your singed back for another assault, for the Supreme Court wasn't done yet. It then gloats and goes on to underline what the Home Minister said while tabling this barbaric act. I quote again, quote, the purpose of enacting the law was explained by the Union Minister of Home Affairs on the floor of the Lok Sabha on 10 September 1991. We see this bill as a measure to provide and develop our glorious traditions of love, peace, and harmony. These traditions are a part of a cultural heritage of which every Indian is justifiably proud. Tolerance for all faiths has characterized our great civilization since the immemorial. This is an act of love. Never forget, these politicians and these judges enacted this draconian act to preserve the characteristic of our civilization. They spoke and acted as though they and not us understand what a civilization is. And because they are the keepers of its characteristics, they must act for us patronizingly, no matter how unjust or undemocratic the consequences of their actions might be. So I ask, what is civilization? How do you define it? Is it an idea to be thrust upon the subjects so they carry it forward? Is it the placement of forks on the left and spoons on the right of resplendent crockery? Is it sartorial splendor? Is it words uttered or written? Is it science? Is it ease of living? Is it consumption? Is it money? Many of the worst tyrants who killed millions, wiped off entire races, even continents, have been poets, artists, proponents of science. But will you call their endowments as promoting or harboring a civilization? To me, the mark of a civilization is this unquenchable thirst of man to demand justice for his ancestors, to correct a historical wrong. For that exemplifies a continuity, an idea, a memory that can never be erased, that is worth fighting for and preserving. It makes justice greater than the sum of its parts. And that is why civilizations are not fleeting like empires. To demand justice for a people who are dead for hundreds of years, it is almost as though you can feel their pain, their suffering, their destruction that has transcended the limits of body and time. And that is why history is a medicine, why catharsis is a cure. And when I see the Ram Janambhoomi being reclaimed, I see it as a catharsis, as a deliverance of justice to my ancestors who were wronged. I do not know what shape the temple would take. I do not know when it would ultimately come up. In a way, being an atheist, these issues are not of importance to me, but I know for a fact that the deliverance has come. It is confounding to me because I am but a bunch of cells, here today, gone tomorrow. But till the time I am alive, this concept of striving to correct a historical injustice is vital to me. It defines who I am, what civilization I am part of. It tells me that erasing my genes cannot erase my civilization. The concept of justice is like memory. It keeps getting passed on until realized. And to those who now call this nation a Hindu Rashtra run by religious zealots and fascists, to those I ask, in which theocratic state would religious zealots wait for half a millennium, and even then, 1 billion people strong, leave it to just 5 people to decide the fate of their demand, their yearning, their consecration of their soul itself? This is what makes me proud, that India, through the delivery and acceptance of the Ayodhya judgment, has written her history with the grammar of justice, not anarchy. This moment throws up a milieu of connected philosophical conundrums, one of them being, should a judge be the product of the society, or should the society be the product of the judge? As I said, 5 judges took the call. The alternative was for 1 billion Hindus to take it. Academy prevailed over anarchy, and I'm proud that it did. On the Babri Masjid Ram Janambhoomi issue, one must read the Supreme Court and the Allahabad Court judgments to really understand why quack leftist historians spread so many lies that the courts had to step in to blast them for their perfidy and mediocrity. These Habibs and Vermas and Menons said the 50 excavated temple pillars were placed there. They said the Vishnu Hari inscription was stolen from the Lucknow Museum and brought there. They said there was a Buddhist shrine, there was a Jain shrine there was a mosque there, but that there was no Hindu temple underneath the dome. Ultimately, all their lies came to nothing as the judge rejected all their claims and accepted that there indeed was a Hindu temple underneath the dome, and that the dome did not have its foundations but was raised on existing walls. This is what the court said about one Professor Suvir Jaiswal. Quote, she claims that the disputed building was constructed in the 16th century by Babur at Ayodhya called Babri Mosque, and this statement she is making as a historian. But simultaneously on page 105 she said that she has not read anything about Babri Mosque and did not study thoroughly and therefore cannot say as to when Babri Mosque came into existence, unquote. Historian after quack historian was exposed. Here is R.C. Thakran, quote, in newspapers I have read Babur had built a mosque in Ayodhya. As a historian, I consider newspapers to be a source of knowledge. I myself never did any excavation in any field, unquote. Here is the quote on the expert Professor Sushil Srivastava, quote, though the witness has been produced as expert historian, on page 222 he admits that he had no knowledge of history, unquote. There is no other way of putting it. The only bulwarks of justice are science and evidence. I take you back to the story of the Turin shroud that for 2000 years was believed to have been used for wrapping the body of Jesus Christ after crucifixion. Until in 1989 when scientists proved through carbon dating that it was only 600 years old. Science teaches us to not fear our past. Law teaches us those nations that fear their past, fear their future. The Places of Worship Act teaches us not only to fear our past, but also to fear our future. That is why I say, in the matter of Ayodhya or Kashi or Mathura, the Hindus must be thanked for pleading before the court to seek justice. If the holiest shrine of some other religion was demolished and people of other faith washed their dirty feet all around the sacred relic, this country would have witnessed a civil war. This atheist owes a debt of gratitude to 1 billion Hindus who are writing their history with the grammar of justice, not anarchy. Especially because it is beyond any doubt that Aurangzeb ordered the demolition of the Kashi Vishwanath temple and ordered that the Gyanvapi mosque be built over it. Only those who have read their history from the Romila Thapar WhatsApp University believe otherwise. It is written in the most authentic biography of Aurangzeb, Masir-e Alamgiri, that in 1669, on orders of Aurangzeb, the Kashi Vishwanath temple was demolished. And then 1 year later, he ordered the demolition of the temple at Mathura and had the idols brought to Agra to be scattered under the steps of the Begum Sahib mosque so that they would be trodden on. This farman is also archived in Bikaner. And here is Sir Jadunath Sarkar's translation of Masir-e Alamgiri, page 52, quote, Aurangzeb, eager to establish Islam, issued orders to the governors of all provinces to demolish the schools and temples of the infidels and with the utmost urgency put down the teachings and the public practice of the religion of these misbelievers, unquote. And yet, there are those who deny the Hindus their legitimate right to correct historical injustice. And principal among them are our legislature and the judiciary through the 1991 Places of Worship Act. And that is also why I profoundly disagree with the RSS chief, Dr. Mohan Bhagwat, when he says, quote, why look for shivling in every mosque, unquote. I am sorry, but I find his statement flippant, frivolous, and an insult to all those who seek to legally correct historical injustices. I know I might be pilloried by some for this, and many would say, "Tu kaun hai bhai, ek Hinduism ko ek Sanghi ko Hinduism mat sikha." But to them I say, yes, you may say that I as an atheist have no right to intervene. But I assert that this is not a Hindu issue or a religious issue. Looking for a shivling, one shivling or 10,000 shivling, reclaiming demolished, destroyed places of worship, correcting historical injustices is an Indian issue. It is a Bharat issue. It is a civilizational issue. The historian Sri Sitaram Goel meticulously tabulated 1862 mosques that are built upon demolished temples. According to J. Sai Deepak and Vikram Sampath, this number could be as high as 40,000. And that is why we need to look for each and every shivling, wherever it is, hidden or exposed, underground or over it. We owe it to our ancestors. We owe it to justice itself, because as I said, the concept of justice is like memory. It keeps getting passed on until realized. Why shouldn't Nandi be washed of the sins the tyrants committed on him and his lord's abode? His legs buckled, his eyes wet, carved in stone, but heart beset. He sat outside with perked up ears, waiting patiently for 400 years. He saw the monster and his hordes charge his lord with rusted swords. He saw them wash, he saw them spit in those waters of the pit. He heard their cries, he heard their call, he lived through it, he saw it all. But not a whisper, not a groan. Life, he knew, was but on loan. And then, after centuries of pain, when his moment of joy came, he saw them claim it was just a fountain. These, ladies and gentlemen, then are the 8 reasons why Hindus in this so-called Hindu Rashtra are not just second class, but rather 8th class citizens. I dare say most Hindus are not even aware of this legislative, judicial, constitutional apartheid. I confess I myself wasn't until a few months ago. Because over these past years, not a day has gone by when the left that holds a monopoly on the media narrative in India, principally through academic inbreeding and entrenched entitlement and a collectivized belief that come what may, the system will protect them. Not a day has gone by when the left hasn't indulged in wanton propaganda, selectivism, scaremongering, Hindu phobia, shameless hypocrisy, and the institutionalization of false equivalence. From spreading misinformation and fake news to pillorying institutions like the Election Commission and the armed forces, nothing was left to chance. The intellectuals turned into pretenders. And the pretenders have now turned into potters. They have made sure the soft clay that gets baked ultimately into wisdom and sagacity is now the clay of untold misery and mediocrity. But it wasn't always like that. No, it wasn't. That clay is special. It is the same clay that suckled the glorious Vedas that fed us, whose richness reflected silently the greatness of its people, whose texture echoed unity and diversity, whose fragrance recalled Bankim and Bharati and Vivekananda and Ambedkar and C.V. Raman, whose blood birthed Shivaji and Subhash Chandra Bose and the great revolutionary. It is the same clay. It is the same clay that trundles down our mountains and is washed over by the sin-obliterating waters of our holy rivers. And while they wait to receive that same clay, receive it in their trembling hands at Ganga Sagar before it is lost forever in the vast oceans of apathy, while they wait, we have work to do to make sure they receive this clay and then shape it into a new India, a great India, where 1 billion Hindus would simply be allowed to live and exist without being discriminated against. They don't ask for much. They never have. And as for the question whether they never will, I leave it on them. I leave it on you. As the great Navajo saying goes, you cannot wake a person pretending to be asleep. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Just request you all to be seated and give me just 2 minutes. Anandji, every time you made an outstanding remark, the gravity of what you said put me in a quandary. Should I applaud it or should I scold myself for being in this situation? So if this isn't a clarion call for the awakening of the Hindu Samaj, I really don't know what else will be. I do hope people take away some actionable from this talk today. Otherwise, we might have to celebrate the graduation of the Hindu Samaj. And with that, Anandji, again, a heartfelt thanks for considering Prabodhan Mancha Parle as the appropriate platform for making your first public speech on this thought-provoking topic. I'm aware you have plans to publish this article as well, and we'll be very glad when you do so.
On the publishing, may I please request the Prabodhan and the auspices to publish it as a small booklet, put it on Amazon. I have only one condition, that all the proceeds of the sales will go to a Hindu cause. Thank you.
Thanks again, sir. We will definitely do that and work with you for it. Of course, we are a bit over time, and therefore, as I had mentioned, we will probably skip the Q&A. But some housekeeping rules and, of course, a vote of thanks. So first, again, a very big thank you to both Dr. Anand Ranganathan and to Jeffrey today for joining us and honoring this audience as we begin the new year. As always, a thank you to BMC for the hall, Tendulkar, Sairaj Arts, and Abhutpurva for banners, backdrop, and publicity. Samrat decorators for the stage, Avinash Paradkar for the sound, and Virag Vision for the videography. I'd also like to thank our elected representatives, both Parag Aravniji and Abhijit Samanji. They always make it and really are an inspiration for us as well. A big thank you, as I said, to our almost 300 contributors. And last but not the least, again, our audience, which continuously inspires us, but as I said, whose goodwill and, if I use a Marathi word, whose punyai gets us the speakers that we get. So thank you again, audience, and keep inspiring us. Thank you. I must, since somebody mentioned, I mean, all of you must have seen, you see these beautiful backdrops. They've been here for all of our 27 programs now. The person who has really been doing this is Suhas Savarkarji. I know he doesn't like to be in the limelight, but I must take his name today. He's been doing them for the last 27 times. Today, he's been joined by Archis Bhide as well. So outstanding work by them. They're the ones who make our backdrops and the posters. So a last announcement, both our guests, as I mentioned, have written a book recently. Jeffrey's written the book on the Bhagavad Gita. Dr. Anand Ranganathan has written a book called The Souffle. Both are available for sale outside. Those of you who buy it today and want to get it autographed by them, they will be signing those as well after a short break. We will close this part of the program with a rendition of Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram, Vande Mataram, Sujalam Sukhalam, Malayaj Sheetalam, Sasya Shyamalam Mataram, Vande Mataram. Jyotsna pulakitayamini Pullakusumita drumadala shobhini Suhasini sumadhura bhashini Sukhadam varadam mataram Vande Mataram Vande Mataram